Welcome to the Dear Doc podcast, where we will discuss the business of running a dental practice with a panel of experts. Now, your host, Dr. Christopher Hoffpower.
Hey guys, this is Doc Hoffpower coming to you again from my studio here in Alvin, Texas. Today I have a different kind of a guest. Usually we bring on people who deal directly with practice management issues or legal issues in the dental practice. But some of our listeners have reached out to me and asked if we could bring on people that talk a little bit more about the other side of the equation. After you pull the money out of the practice, what do you do with it? So today, I'm really excited to bring on Kris Benson, and he's with the Reliant Management Group. He's going to talk to us about one of the different strategies that you may use to keep some of that hard-earned cash and make it grow whenever you pull it out of the practice and begin saving for your retirement. So Kris, it's great to have you on the program today. How are you doing? Where are you located right now?
I'm talking to you today, Doc, from Roswell, Georgia. Our office is just outside of Atlanta, just north of Atlanta, about 20 miles in a town called Roswell.
Fantastic. So no aliens over there though, right?
That's New Mexico, Roswell. We don't have area to the best of my knowledge.
So real quick, why don't you tell our listeners what it is you do in your business and how it might relate to them?
Sure. Well, let me take a quick step back and I'll kind of start with a definition. I think most of your listeners probably know what self-storage is, right? So, right. I mean, essentially, if any of your listeners are driving on a highway right now, if you look off any major off-ramp, there's probably a self-storage facility there with brands like Extra Space or Public. And ostensibly, Kris, we're renting garages. Right. Americans do a really good job of buying more stuff than they actually have room for. And so storage facilities fill that need of taking that stuff and putting it somewhere safe and secure so that people can access it when they need it. So Reliant Real Estate is a vertically integrated self-storage operator. And that just means we're buying facilities, but also managing them. So it's our employees who are behind the desk. We have a portfolio of about 45 properties now, primarily focused in the Southeast. So Florida, Georgia, Carolinas, Alabama, Arkansas, Texas, that general vicinity.
So you guys, I guess you get a lot more business right after hurricane season comes through and knocks down a few houses?
Before hurricane season. Usually people are trying to lock down all the stuff, think patio furniture, that kind of thing. So they're putting it all so it's not flying around.
You know, Kris, off the air before we got on here, I talked to you a little bit about the fact, self-storage has actually kind of always been one of the things I wanted to get into. I really wasn't sure how to get into it. I talked to a couple of people and because I think it's a really great way to spend your money. You just, you buy something and it just keeps making you money. And then I started talking to them about all the nightmares involved in owning these things. And it kind of was off-putting to me. And so whenever I found out a little bit about what you guys do, I was really excited to have you on the program. You guys kind of you mitigate all of that risk that is involved in owning one of these properties. So talk to us a little bit about how that works and how your investment platform works.
Yeah. I mean, Kris, I think you hit the nail right on the head, right? A lot of our investors who partner with us are, let's use dentistry, right? They have a day job. Right. Or have exited, had a liquidity event. And I think what you're describing is, do you want to be a direct investor, buy your own stuff and go out and run the facilities? Or do you want to be a passive investor? And look, if you can be a direct investor, do it. You'll make money than going and working with a group like ours, right? Because we're going to make money too. So if you can do it yourself, by all means. I think what most of our investors have made that decision that they like the idea of diversifying into an alternative investment like real estate or self-storage. But also they like the idea of having that diversification, but not having to learn the expertise of being a real estate professional, right? Most Absolutely. Of the people who are listening here are really great dentists, but they don't know how to do real estate, at least at the professional, management level. And they could certainly learn, but most of our investors kind of make that decision where they say, look, I like the idea of being in a non-correlated asset like real estate. I like the idea of self-storage because of, some pillars. There's three things we really like about it, but I don't want to be the guy or gal who goes out and learns how to do this. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, to your question around how our investment platform works, typically we have guys and gals who are looking for the access to the investment class, but primarily without doing the work. They'd prefer to say, hey, you guys are a professional group. I'd like to partner with you, deploy my capital, and we'll reap the benefits of that particular asset class.
So, Kris, one of the things that I've always thought, and never be embarrassed to correct me if I'm wrong, because the more I'm wrong, the smarter I get. So
Sure.
Here's the thing. I've always kind of equated self-storage and realty to gold with monetary units. When shit gets bad and when the economy starts to fall apart, it seems to me like self-storage is where you'd want to be, because that's where everyone's stuff gets stuck. In the interim, it seems like the kind of business that would boom during a recession. Can you talk to me a little bit about whether or not I'm smoking crack and how that plays out?
Well, we're recording this at the end of July, Kris. I'll let you know in about 90 days. So look, you bring up a fair point. Historically, self-storage has performed very well in downturns, right? So through the Great Recession of 2007, 8, and 9, self-storage was one of the best performing asset classes in commercial real estate, right? So compared to apartments, retail, office, industrial, self-storage did really well. And the thesis behind that really is when people downsize or have transition in their lives, it creates demand for storage. We talk about the 4 Ds of self-storage. So it's death, divorce, dislocation, and downsizing. Well, unfortunately, specific to COVID, right, we're probably going to have a fair amount of a lot of those.
Right.
And so right now, whatever your perspective is on COVID, I don't think we're anywhere close to being through with this. But right now, the asset class is faring very well, both at our portfolio level, but even at the national scale with some of the larger real estate investment trusts. People are paying their bills. Occupancy is staying pretty high. And so we're making it through pretty unscathed. But that being said, none of us know what the next 3 to 6 months bring, right? But if history holds true, typically in those times of disruption, self-storage, you're able to create demand for self-storage. And so to your point, we're hoping that the demand is going to be somewhat inelastic in this next correction.
So I think a lot of our listeners, the most that they know about self-storage is, some supposedly reality TV show with a bunch of eclectic characters gathering around to haggle over
Storage wars. That's storage
the
wars,
remains
Kris.
of someone's broken life. So what is the average storage unit story look like? A day in the life of a storage unit. Obviously, it can't be as exciting as it appears on TV. One would hope not.
Are you asking the specific facility level or what's in a unit?
So what is specifically storage level in your storage facility? Let's say you were to visit one of your random storage facilities in a day. Tell us what the day in the life of that looks like.
Yeah. So what's interesting about this as an asset class is, so we typically have 2 employees on every site, right? A site manager and assistant site manager. The majority of their day is paperwork and administrative and marketing. There's not a lot of foot traffic to self-storage facilities, especially if you're a residential customer. Typically, you go in, put your stuff there, and then it sits there for a year, 18 months, 6 months, 3 months, depends on the particulars of your need. So there's not thousands of people coming through these sites, even though at a typical site, you may have between 500 and 1,000 units. There's not a lot of foot traffic. Now, if you're a commercial customer, right, let's say you're a handyman and you use a storage facility as your office, you may be there 2-3 times a day, tools, equipment, that kind of thing. So, the particulars of the customer matter. But as a self-storage facility manager, what you're typically doing is following up on AR issues, right? People who haven't paid their rents. You're making sure the site is clean and safe, right? So that the gate's working, the security's working. We do site walkthroughs 2 or 3 times a day where they're going down through the hallways to make sure there's not trash or, someone hasn't broken into a unit or broke a door or those types of things. But what we joke of is here is, it's 20 days of boredom and then about 10 pure panic, right? The first 10 days or the first 5 days of the month, and the last 5 days of the month where you're chasing rents and kind of that accounts receivable when it's crazy. In the middle of the month, most people, it's a garage, right? So there's not a lot of things that can really go wrong unless some catastrophic event.
It's funny. Hearing you say that reminds me a lot about a lot of some of the things that we said when I was in the military about what that was like. It was a lot of hurry up and wait. You've got 23 hours a day of pure boredom and 1 hour of pure terror. So if I were an investor who wanted to do this solo, I wanted to do this on my own, I decided that I had some cash and I wanted to create my own storage center. What are you looking at cost-wise? What are you looking at logistic-wise? What does that look like from that creator perspective as a bootstrap?
I mean, I hate to give you the answer of it depends, but
right. It's a fair answer. We give that to our patients all day.
Yeah. So I think it's a lot about what your specific goals are, right? There are some facilities where guys have automated it with a kiosk and there's no employees on site, right? So you may have a smaller facility where you can get your lease done, you can get locks all from an automated kiosk. And that's a really interesting way to do it. And it works really well in the small rural markets. And sometimes from a cost perspective, it depends, but you can have smaller sites that are, I just had lunch with an investor actually, and his friend bought a facility behind a car wash that the owner of the car wash had just kind of let it go to crap, and it was 0% full. He bought it for $5,000. Now there's only 60 units in it, so it's very, very small, right? But it's 0% full. So there's some money to be made on little deals like that. And manage it, and then you can go to the other end of that spectrum, right, Kris, where you're developing on the corner of Main and Main, building a 3-story glass and brick building, and that property's, that's a $20 million development deal, and you're putting in a significant chunk of capital to make that deal happen. So it's really all over the board. I think, obviously the larger you go, the more sophistication it requires from an operational standpoint.
Right.
What's interesting about storage, different than some other asset classes, like if you're doing single family home rentals, for example, it's, you rent the house and you're basically done, right? I mean, you may have some maintenance along the way, but your tenant's in there and you're done. With our business, it's a 30-day lease. So it's an operational business with a real estate play. So there's still real estate attached to it, but internally, inside of that, you have an operational business that needs to be run. So it's an interesting kind of nuance comparatively to some of the, the 4 major food groups on the real estate side of things.
Okay. Well, since we're getting into this umbrella of real estate, and we're talking about the different ways that different classes might pay you back or the expenses of getting involved in them. Talk to us a little bit about that overlay, what you consider the 4 different food groups of realty, which I love that, by the way. And perhaps what percentage of your investment diet should be composed of each?
Well, I would think of it a little, first off, don't listen to me on investment advice. Means, you should trust.
Is this where we give the disclosure and you say, I am
I know enough to be dangerous, but certainly you shouldn't take any of my advice to heart. Because if you look at my portfolio, I'm so over leveraged in real estate. Every financial advisor would pretty much have a heart attack. But I invest in what I know. So, what I would say, Kris, is when investors ask that question, it's about goals with your money, right? And, my personal opinion is I understand real estate much better than I understand the equities market. Inherently, I'm more comfortable investing in that space. When you talk about kind of the 4 major food groups, I'm not necessarily sure you should diversify across multiple asset classes, although not a bad idea. But every asset class has a cyclical nature, right? And we're seeing it now, right? Retail, hospitality, office, maybe not office as much as retail and hospitality, but hotels and retail centers are going to get crushed.
Mm-hmm.
There's some buying opportunities there, right? But, in the short term, it's going to hurt. So I think you have to look at it from a portfolio standpoint of real estate as a whole, as an investment class, is a non-correlated asset to equities markets. We do not fluctuate up and down like the S&P 500 does, right? So if the market takes a nosedive, the value of your real estate is based off income. So as long as your income hasn't changed, the value is the same. So I think, it's a question of how do you offset some of the portfolio you already have and a percentage of that in a bucket where it's not tied to what's happening with the gyrations of, the S&P or the stock market. So, every investment professional is going to tell you something different, as far as specific allocations. But I think it's just a general sense of how do I balance and hedge against other investments that I've made.
Well, I've got a good friend. He's huge in the real estate like you are, but I think he's on the other end of things. He lovingly refers to himself as a slumlord. He buys the cheapest houses he can, and he says, and his philosophy makes a lot of sense. There's always going to be poor people, and they have the lowest standards of anyone out there, and so you have to make very few repairs on the property, and it's easy peasy for him. I don't know that I want to be in that part of the market, but I guess you're right. There's different flavors out there, and you just kind of have to look at what it is that you're wanting to get back from it.
And I think, Kris, that's where being a passive versus a direct investor is interesting, right? Because as a passive investor, you can kind of sprinkle your money around, right? You can say, hey, I like the idea of self-storage. I like the idea of apartments. I like the idea of industrial. When you're a direct investor, you're not doing that, right? Like your buddy knows single family homes and that's what he invests in, right? So it's harder to kind of create your own diversified portfolio when you're running them yourselves, because it's hard to be jack of all trades, right? You can, but it's more difficult to be able to know how to run a self-storage facility, an apartment complex, an office center.
Absolutely.
So, I think that's the value of kind of passive income, and even some of the crowdfunding sites that exist today, where you can go invest in some of these sites for pretty small dollar amounts and really create nice diversification across multiple markets.
All right. So why don't you tell us very specifically how people can get involved with working with you? And before you do, guys, I do this every time we interview someone. I have no disclosures financially or otherwise to make about this person I'm interviewing. I don't do business with them yet. I might. And I don't get any kind of commissions on anybody who signs up or anything. I just thought it was a really interesting business model, and I thought I'd bring it to you guys for your consideration. All right, go ahead. My disclosure's over. Go ahead and tell us how they can get involved in working with you.
Yeah, I would say, so for us, if you find yourself in that passive income bucket where you'd like to see exposure to the asset class, you can work with a real estate operation or operator like us. How you get in touch with us, you can check out ReliantInvestments.com. There's a lot of information on the firm and our track record there. There's an Our Investments tab that will open you up to the current offering that we have, which is called Reliant Self-Storage Fund 2. It's essentially, think of a mutual fund of self-storage properties. So you invest at the fund level and, you're diversified across the portfolio of properties. And then I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, Kris, where we post a lot of educational content too. It's Kris Benson with a K. If you search Kris Benson and Reliant, you'll definitely find us. We have a YouTube channel and all those kinds of things. If you Google Reliant Real Estate or Reliant Investments or my name with Reliant, you're going to find us, and be happy to help however we can. One thing I would say on our website, Kris, is there's an educational content. It's free. We have a whole series of videos on essentially what you should know as a commercial real estate investor. It's not specific to storage, it's specific to real estate investing, and a lot of people found value in that as well.
Fantastic. Well, Kris, I'm going to let you close with something, and that is, of all the questions I've asked you here today, what question should I've asked that I didn't ask? And I know that's a loaded question, isn't it? And if you had one piece of free advice to give to people who are thinking about getting into this, what would that be?
Both good questions. Let me start with the free advice piece. And this is more of a philosophy, I guess, than advice. But what I would say is, although real estate at its surface is fairly straightforward, it gets complex pretty quickly. And what you have to understand, I'm a subscriber to the 10,000 hour rule, right? So it takes 10,000 hours to make an expert. It does, and you're going to make mistakes if you're just learning, and that's okay. But you really have to think about, are you approaching this as I'm going to be a professional? And just like you guys do in the dentistry practice where you school for many years before you practice, same thing here. Don't just jump into something with your money and hope it's all going to turn out okay without the expertise behind it. And you really got to think to yourself, am I willing to commit that 10,000 hours to become an expert in that particular space? So that would be my advice, I guess, on someone who's ready to jump into something like this. For you, Kris, as far as, question you can ask, there's lots, there's all kinds of interesting questions. I mean, I think for again, in the real estate space, it's hard to focus because there's so many paths you can go down. And so what I like to talk about is, there's so many different asset classes, so many strategies you can employ. The first category, like we talked about, is, do I want to be passive or direct investor? If I want to be a direct investor, find the story that makes sense to you, right? And then have it be rooted in data. And if you can back up your thesis with data, then you're probably in a good place to start. So Kris, if you came to me and said, hey, I want to invest in real estate, I'd say, great. You want to do it direct or passive? And you'd say, I want to be direct. I can do this on my own. Awesome. All right. What category do you want to go into? And you would say, I really like retail. I think there's going to be some buying opportunities from COVID. I want to go buy retail space. Fantastic. All right. Let's focus specifically on that and use data behind it to help you drive where your strategy goes. And you're going to be in a much better position than 80% of the people who jump into the space.
Fantastic. Well, guys, you heard it here. You can look Kris up on LinkedIn or at Reliant Investments. And Kris, thank you so much for coming on and giving us a little bit of information about what you do. And for those of you who have joined us here, thank you for supporting the Dear Doc podcast and wasting yet another hour of your life listening to the droning sound of my voice. We really appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you on the other side. Thanks, folks. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Dear Doc podcast, your source for the business and legal questions associated with your dental practice. Don't forget to subscribe to the Dear Doc podcast on all major platforms.